to ask you, do you brothers know each other? Have you met before? Have you? Is that a silly
Yeah.
question?
No, it's not a silly question. Just by chance, to be honest, we've bumped into each other quite a few times.
Okay, mashallah,
Mm.
mashallah. Okay, so let's get started. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. So, a huge welcome to our guests this evening, Brother Jalal, Brother Sean, on what I'm hoping to be a very not only interesting but incredibly important topic given what's coming up very soon. The days are fast approaching. May the 7th, subhanAllah, I believe that's a Thursday, and it's a topic that needs to be addressed. We felt as a non-profit volunteer organization needs to be addressed. So without wasting any more time, I will begin to introduce our dear guests. Thank you so much, brothers, for joining us and taking your time out of your busy schedules. So, beginning with Brother Muhammad Jalal, who is a lecturer in politics and hosts the podcast, The Thinking Muslim. He delivers a regular course for young Muslims exploring the thoughts of Islam and liberalism, and is currently working on developing content on the same subject for the Sapiens Institute. He writes for numerous online journals, including Traversing Tradition and Cage. Welcome, Brother Jalal. Our
Jazakallah khair. Thank you so
wa-
much for inviting me.
you're welcome. Brother Sean is a co-founder of North Star Politics, a platform with the mission to push political imagination. After graduating in PPE from Oxford, he reverted to Islam, Allahu Akbar. In his content, he ties together politics, philosophy, and Islam to give his perspective on current affairs and stories he explores. Once again, welcome, brothers. So let's set the tone. We're in a climate where many Muslims feel vulnerable due to the rise of Reform UK and their very recent seat gains. Why is it important for our community to vote this May? So, this is the tone, dear listeners, of our webinar this evening. Why is it important for our community to vote this May? So let's begin with a couple of opening questions, brothers. It's popcorn style, so feel free to answer as a when you feel you wish to. Beginning with, do Muslim votes actually matter in English local elections, or is it that it's just a myth?
Sean, if you don't mind, I'll try to have a go at that, answering that question first. So, do votes really matter from the Muslim community? Well,
Yeah.
it depends, is my answer to that question. Yes, they generally do matter, but it depends on where that particular Muslim lives. If you live in an area which has a very dense Muslim population, then by definition, your vote is going to probably mean much more than if you live in an area where the Muslims are sparsely populated, and so your vote is diffused amongst a number of other of the electorate of constituents. So, if you live in Bradford, West or East, for example, if you live in Whitechapel, in Tower Hamlets, if you live in Waltham Forest, or if you live in Ilford North and South, Redbridge, if you live in Birmingham, many of the seats, it's local elections. So Birmingham, as a council, election, these really Dewsbury, Blackburn, these are really important areas. And when it comes down to individual wards, so of course in this election, you're going to be electing usually three members, could be two members, but three members to represent you locally on the local council. And so, if you live in, a Birmingham Spark Hill constituency, for example, and within a ward within Spark Hill, you will find that the number of Muslims that exist in a particular ward could even number 70, 80%. And that means that we have the size to impact the outcome of that election if we work together. But of course, if you live in maybe some of the Essex seats, um, or if there are parts of the country where we just don't have those numbers, then of course voting may work, especially if you're part of a broader alliance and a collaborative. But you know, in both circumstances, if you can't come together with Muslims and you don't find natural allies, then it may be far more tricky for you to have an impact as a voter. So for the vast majority of Muslims and the vast majority of seats within which Muslims live, yes, it does matter. Maybe the 90% of where Muslims live, it does matter. And our problem has been actually historically that we haven't ever worked in unison, whether at the general election or whether at local council elections. And so that has led to our inability to make any form of sizable impact at election time.
Yeah, I would just basically echo what Mohammed was saying, and say just to help basically maybe explain as well why that's the case. And that's because we have like a majoritarian voting system. This is obviously local council elections that are coming up. So really, you're just whoever gets the majority in your local wards will get the seats and make up the seats. For when it comes to MP elections, we have a first past the post system, if you guys have heard of that before. And that basically therefore means that a party's concentration or a party's power, sorry, is entirely contingent or dependent on their geographical concentration. And so communities where you have strong, like densely populated areas, so strong like Muslim areas, that's obviously where it's going to matter more. I think, yeah, and I think ultimately, even if you're in an area where there's not a lot of Muslims, it should still matter, because actually it's probably in those areas where there aren't many Muslims that you're going to have policies that are very anti-Muslim. You always get a very like inverse relationship of people feeling quite xenophobic or like anti-immigrant in the areas which literally just don't have many immigrants at all, and that's always like a very interesting phenomenon that occurs. And so it's still very important that you build coalitions with people who, and I'm sure this is the type of conversation we'll get into later on in the webinar, but people who have like the Muslim community's best interests at heart. And that actually probably is a case by case basis, you know, like it's not always going to be clear cut which candidate or which group has the best interests at heart for Muslims.
Thank you, brother. So a thought just popped into my mind as I was hearing you both speak. These coalitions working in unison, what does that look like? What does that sound like? Because if we take, your average Muslim, um, not too well versed in the politics, would like to vote because sees it's in the Muslim's best interest. How would somebody like that find out the best person to ally with, to be in unison with within their ward?
Yeah, again, Sean, please do, if you want to respond, please for sure unmute yourself. But I would say let me spell out like what the Muslim Vote argues should be our approach. And they came to this conclusion after consultation with a good number of us. So I think we're fairly united, at least, from an organizational perspective, how we should proceed. So the Muslim Vote argues, and if you go on their website, they've got some direction on most concentrated areas and where we should be fielding our votes. But the argument is as follows. We should not be voting Labour or Conservative in this next council election, regardless of who the candidate is, because these parties do not deserve our vote for a mixture of domestic and international reasons. Internationally, of course, these two parties have taken us into genocide and continue to work to undermine the Palestinian rights. And domestically, we know that these two parties are purveyors of Islamophobia. They have different degrees and different tones, but actually, at the moment, they're occupied by people who harm the Muslim community. So there should be a zero tolerance towards both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party. And I can't make that point any more clearer, that we should not be voting for any of their candidates in our local elections. So then what's the next step? Well, if you think about how we should proceed, my argument is that we should start, and the argument of the Muslim vote is that we should start with any good quality independent in our area. So you may have an independent group you may have a group of individuals, Muslims or non-Muslims actually, who are good quality candidates who come from the community, who we should be supporting. And I would suggest that we should first knock on their doors and seek out those candidates. So there are some great candidates in, say, Blackburn that I've heard of, in Bradford that I've communicated with, in all sorts of areas. In Whitechapel, you've got some really great independent groupings who are putting forward candidates. Failing that, if there isn't, if you live in an area where you just don't have a ward which is occupied by independent candidates, or you've got one independent and the rest of them are from political parties, then what I'm suggesting is that hold your nose, and I say this, holding your nose purposely, and vote for a Green candidate, even though they're imperfect. And I will explain maybe later why I think they're imperfect. And why I think that we should not put all of our lots behind the Green Party. But in this sense, the more we hemorrhage the vote of the Labour Party in particular in this coming election, the more we drive the point home that the Labour Party cannot stop, should never ignore the Muslim community. So I would say as a second tier, you vote for a Green candidate if you can't find an appropriate independent candidate.
Thank you, brother. Brother Sean?
Yeah, yeah. Just to even give you some context of how me and Mohammed actually met, it was very early days on the whole kind of like independent campaign, pro-Palestine campaigns that popped up for the 2024 general election. So I think a running theme is that we're probably going to agree a lot in this discussion, because I agree. I think the wider context in which these elections sit is that it's coming after the 2024 general election, and before that, obviously, there was a wide support by the political class. So it doesn't matter who you are, Labour, Conservative, whatever, but a wider support by the political class for, like, Israel, their domination of the Palestinians, etc. And since then, that has been a red line, which I think has spearheaded a movement for Muslims to be a lot more politically conscious, because actually our votes for a long time were taken for granted by these big parties. So it's very important that regardless of who you might think will win, or for whatever pragmatic reason, that Labour and Conservative just don't get our votes. Because what they're going to do, as part of their teams, in their little council teams or whatever you call it, they're going to look at the data and see who voted for them, who didn't vote for them. And we need to sort of come together. Well, I think the last 2 years, the sentiment has been we need to come together as a community to show that we actually have political leverage. And part of exercising or showing you have political leverage is acting in unison. So then when it becomes a bit more complicated, is obviously answering that question of, so who do you actually vote for? And I saw in the chat, like, to what end? Well, actually, like, for the local elections in particular, it's your local councillors who really do decide where money is spent in your local area. I think people get quite confused around like big parties, MPs, etc. Your MPs don't really have that much power when it comes to local decision making or local spend. They're more of like a conduit for like access and network and leverages and things like that. But really and truly, it's these hidden figures who you probably don't know their names, which decide where your money's spent. So even just to kind of bring it home, in my area, I don't really live in a Muslim area. I live in Enfield, and it's a big kind of Labour versus Conservative back and forth. In fact, it's sort of divided along ethnic lines of like Kurdish and Turkish people instead. So it's a whole different community. So the way I'm navigating it is thinking about, okay, well, if I'm not voting for Labour or Conservative, then which group of like independents or even Greens are actually putting forward the best kind of local strategy. Because actually, there's certain local things that I care about. I want to see more affordable housing in my area. I actually want to see some crime go down, etc. Right? So really, part of this is really thinking, what do you want to see in your local area, and then thinking about the principle as well. So, for example, like reform in my local area, who actually have some like decent amount of support, would also say that they want local crime to go down, but they come in at it from a very different angle and a very different approach versus maybe some of the independents and the Greens. So I would say then, yeah, once you under have it, it is difficult. It's not easy, but you do need to actually sort of go out of your comfort zone if you're not really interested in politics or you don't know much about politics, to do the research to find out who's actually standing in my local area and what are they talking about and what are the real problems in my local area. So there might be some Facebook groups, or even if you just search online, to be honest, you might see some stuff come up where you can start gaining the information to understand who to choose. But there are quite a lot of independent networks and, again, Green Party candidates who, from a principled level, I think would definitely kind of overlap with the sort of Muslim project, so to speak, and what we stand for, which is, again, like from a very materialist paradigm of, like, having a more affordable housing, a better community. In that sense, it works well. Obviously, for other things, again, which we'll talk about, the Greens might not be so perfect, but also I actually think that politics and the game of politics is a game of imperfection. I don't even think, like, and this is getting off topic, that in many Muslim societies, politics is perfect either, right? So it's always about just kind of accepting that fact.
Thank you, brothers. That was really informative. Thank you so much. So I've got to ask, with Reform UK winning lots of seats, many in our community are actually feeling scared, and rightly so. So if we choose not to vote, who actually wins?
Sean, why don't you go with that? Yeah.
Yeah, fine. So if you don't, well, listen, I feel like, well, I don't know, maybe you can come in and help me on this one, Mohammed, but I feel like we're living in a time now where more than ever Muslim identity is politicized. And actually, like, we don't have the privilege of pretending like that doesn't affect us. And so, by definition, the powers that be don't want you to be politically engaged. And actually, us not being politically engaged, even if, like, your vote, so to speak, wouldn't have affected the election anyways, the powers that be will still win, because ultimately the project is to really immiserate people so much so that they don't really care what's going on. And actually, like, having a stake in your local area, having a stake in your local elections, does a lot. Even from a sort of perspective, even like from a pragmatic perspective of just, again, people are going to analyze the data, look at the data, all these candidates, and think about, okay, where did votes go, and why perhaps did some Muslim areas or Muslim pockets in our wards or whatever not vote for us? And that's, again, it's all about exercising political leverage, and that happens from the grassroots level upwards. And so I think, like, even when I speak to a lot of young people, I'm saying, like, we don't really have a choice. And actually, it's very important for us to realize that. In fact, I would even sort of take it away from the framing of, like, it is a choice. Rather, I think it's a duty on all of us as believing Muslims to practice in this way, because your vote is an extension of your principles, an extension of your beliefs, and your beliefs and your principles are also fundamentally always rooted in servitude to God, right? And so you should just see this as one of the many ways that you can have your say in your local community and in society. So I'm not going to promise it's going to change anything. I'm not going to promise that, your vote's going to have a meaningful difference. But we need to kind of change the attitude that it doesn't, because en masse and, like, at the aggregate level, it really does. So ultimately, I think a disengaged Muslim is always beneficial for, again, your reforms, your restores even now as well.
Yeah, I mean, maybe, and it's, just to build on that point there about reform. See, I think we have to ask ourselves a question. Reform, of course, are a nasty party and they've got some reprehensible ideals and ideas. But, what have we faced over the last 13 years, 14 years of a conservative government? What are we facing today at the hands of a Muslim Home Secretary? And we find that so many of those reform ideas have been co-opted by these two big political parties. So I would say that sometimes the Reform Party would become the only bogeyman, and that's, I think, wrong. We shouldn't fear reform solely. We should fear all of these political parties. In a way, they've used the Muslim community as a political football in order to gain votes, and they continue to do that as political parties. Just think about how Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary, has utilized and abused really Muslim like the fear of Muslims in order for her own personal ambitions, but also in order to seek some form of political credibility within an electorate that's turning more and more right wing. So I think it's fair to say that reform should be surely, certainly very bad, certainly very evil in so many respects, but reform should be lumped in with these other political parties because so many of them have reprehensible policies that really harm us. The interesting thing about reform, and this is not a positive, by the way, but it's an interesting. Let's say it's a development because reform is polling so high in the polls. The chances are in the next election, reform is going to snuff out conservative and Labour votes, and so what you'll have in so many areas where you've got Labour and Conservative, battles, and we're talking about the general election, because reform is going to take votes from Labour and the Conservatives, it's going to bring the overall vote share down. And that gives us an opportunity in 20 odd seats around the country where Muslims do have numbers, right? And we do have allies from the broader community. It gives us an opportunity to put in our candidates like we were able to do in the last general election, where four of the independent MPs were Muslims. This is a record that was broken, and we had narrow misses in 8 other constituencies, right? So, and that's really without a strong Reform Party. In the next election, Reform is going to be really cut at the heels of the two big political parties. So, in the short term, Reform is actually going to, harm the two-party system, and that should be in our favor as a community because we've been harmed by these two political parties for too long.
That makes a lot of sense, actually, when you mention about the vote share coming down, and we can use that, we can leverage that as Muslims. So I just want to direct your attention to a specific question in the chat. Somebody by the name of Hassan says, voting for a party, any party, is automatically voting for a government system that will put the interest of UK over any other place, including Muslim lands, right? So, as Muslims, what is our allegiance to? And before you respond, brothers, I know many will come from a similar angle that, well, I'm Muslim, and unless if I've understood your question correctly, Hussein, that as Muslims, we should not be voting for any political party slash system because we are Muslims and that we should be voting for the Sharia law. However, is it not, and correct me, brothers, is it not that the general principle Islamically is that we are to stop, prevent, reduce the harm that could be inflicted upon the Muslims before a benefit? So, based on that principle, if I've understood it correctly, I would like to ask you now that for those Muslims that do believe that they should not be voting for any system other than advocating for Sharia, what do you say to those brothers and sisters?
So I would say Hassan's message is not quite saying that. Like he's not using an Islamic argument here. Maybe he does believe that, but his argument is more a practical argument that, voting for a party is voting for a government. So let me take those 2 points separately because I think there are separate arguments. Let's take the Sharia argument first. Now, if someone believes, and they believe sincerely that, voting in a general election is haram, then I would say, look, don't vote. Like, I wouldn't, I obviously have a conversation with them to explain why I think differently. But if you really believe it's haram, then don't do a haram. Like, why would any Muslim encourage another Muslim to do a haram, right? But also accept that in Islam, if there is an evidence that someone else puts forward to say something is not haram, then it reduces that haram from a munkar, right? So the scholars have agreed that a munkar is what everyone accepts collectively to be a haram. All of the scholarly community believe to be a haram, right? So, for example, we wouldn't say that, I don't know, not giving not giving zakah on gold is a munkar. If a Shafi'i tomorrow did not give zakah on gold, we wouldn't say, astaghfirullah, that's a munkar, because I'm a Hanafi. That's a munkar, because of course Hanafis, wrong phrase, jewelry. If a Shafi'i did not give zakah on jewelry, then we wouldn't say that's a munkar, because there's a legitimate difference of opinion, right? The Hanafi has to accept that the Shafi'i has a different view about that matter. In the same way, a whole corpus of scholars, probably the vast majority of scholars today, argue that in some contexts it is permitted to vote in Western societies. So if you believe it's haram, then no problem. Like, I would say, that's your view, and I would never dream of trying to get you to do a haram action. In the same way, you shouldn't call it a munkar if I encourage people to vote in an election given certain parameters. So I think that's the Sharia discussion. But I think the discussion that Hossan is raising is really a practical conversation. And simply put, voting for a political party does not automatically mean that you're voting for a government system. Not at all. When those people in Blackburn voted for Adnan Hussein, or Shaukat Adam was voted in Leicester, or Ayub Khan was voted in Birmingham. Voting for these people didn't mean you voted for a government. They're not part of the government. They're actually on the back benches. They're there to hold the government to account, right? And so what their responsibility is, by and large, is to hold the government to account, the government of the day to account. So actually you're voting for an opposition to the government, actually, rather than the government. So I would say that's just a very, sorry, Hussam, I don't want to sound condescending, but that's a simplistic view about how politics works. It's like, for example, those people in Ireland, in Northern Ireland, who vote for Sinn Féin. Are they voting for the government? Of course not. I mean, Sinn Féin, has a very strong view about not taking their seats in Parliament, but they vote for them election after election because they want them to be their representatives. So it's the opposite of that, in other words, right? So the system is a little bit more layered and complex than just saying that if you vote, you're suddenly supporting the government. And then it's even more naive to say, oh, that means if you vote, you're directly contributing to the war in Iran or contributing to the war in Iraq. But that's not how it works, right? Those people in Leicester who voted for Shaukat were not voting at all to vote for the war in Iran. They voted for someone who was so principled, he stood up against the war in Iran. Do you see? So I think maybe there's a thing that's missing in our community, and we don't do enough of this. Just having, and Sean is great at doing this, by the way, just like political literacy, just explaining like the basics 101 of the political, what it is, so that we really understand the system for what it is and what it isn't. Because I think there's too many misunderstandings there. Sorry for a long answer, sister.
No, I think that was really good as well. I mean, I'm not really going to touch the Sharia part because I feel like as a revert, I don't want to come with the hubris to pretend as I know all the kind of fiqh arguments and things like that. But what I would say is I'll also just push back on the general idea that Muslims need to do things just for the purpose of Muslims, but actually like the message of like servitude to God is to actually overcome and enact justice in the world around us. And the recipients of that don't necessarily have to be Muslim, right? Like we're living in the UK, we're building coalitions and communities of all different types of people from different areas. A lot of the homeless people we see on the streets, for example, we need to care about as well. Just because they're not Muslim doesn't mean we shouldn't care about it. I do kind of understand the hesitancy of obviously this valid worry, around complicity with the British state and actually ultimately just existing in the UK and how your actions can play into that. But what Mohammed was basically pointing towards as well is to say that actually trying to expect like perfection in a very imperfect world, like the material world by definition is very imperfect, um, can be a very paralyzing thing. And actually, like with our intentions and the way we vote, and the intentions of even some of like the independent Muslim MPs who stepped up, it was to understand that look, this is the sixth largest economy in the world. This is one of the most powerful countries in the world. Surely, from the quote unquote inside, we can make a change. And actually, like change has always happened in piecemeal. It's always been slow. It's always been from the bottom upwards. And even if you just think about how like the Quran, for example, was revealed, right? It took a very, very long time, right? And the message there is that change is incremental. And actually, I feel like because this is the first time in like I guess Western Muslim history where Muslims have been in this position and have being in this kind of modern world where like we're on the back foot by definition. I think we have this uncharted territory and uncharted waters, and that uncertainty can again be paralyzing because it's very easy to cling on to the certainty of like our past tradition, right, where it's actually very clear about these things. But actually we're living in a time where none of this has ever happened before. So we have to use the principles and the wisdom of the past to navigate the kind of choppy waters. And so I feel like the attempts to do that, the attempts to do that are not always going to be perfect, but it is fundamentally a worthy attempt, right? And so we shouldn't pretend as if like it's not a worthy pursuit, but actually being involved, taking part in these political systems and doing what we can with our own talents and our own expertise is very, very important in my eyes.
I love that. Thank you, brothers. That actually leads me to one of my questions further down on my sheet, actually. So forgive me, Brother Jalal or Brother Sean. I don't know if you received the questions, but what are the top three mistakes Muslim communities are making right now when trying to organize politically? And if they're not mistakes, then what would you say are the top three things that we aren't doing?
Yeah, I'd say the first one, just the first one that comes up top of my head. I don't know if I have three actually, so maybe it can be like a bit of a back and forth. But I would say being resistant to building coalitions with different communities. So I think even if we kind of open up that conversation around the Green Party now, I mean, the big elephant in the room is obviously like there's a lot of like policies and principles that the Green Party represents that is just like not Islamic. Okay, obviously they're huge on the proliferation of LGBTQ plus identity and all these sorts of things, right? And so, like, immediately when you look at a party policy like that, and as a Muslim, you just think, well, astaghfirullah, like, I just don't even want to touch it, okay? But what I want to get through to people is that the Muslim communities, as they are dispersed and as we currently exist, are not going to go anywhere unless you build bridges with other people. And building bridges, by definition, with quote unquote, like just non-Muslims, means that you're going to build bridges with people who don't have Muslim values. And when you're looking at the lay of the land and who to pick, right? The Green Party, for all their flaws, don't preach this message of domination. They still talk about like actually building a coalition with Muslims. They have a deputy Muslim who runs the party, which is Moffin Ali. And on top of that, they actually do talk about big problems that are affecting not just Muslims, but a lot of people in the country, right? Which is the domination of like the financial class and the current political class. They're actually quite good on foreign policy as well. And let me be clear. I'm not a Green Party member. I've met Zach Polansky. I've interviewed him before. I think he's like a fundamentally like a decent person. Same with people like Jeremy Corbyn, right? But again, the thing that we need to think about is how do you actually build a coalition of people, right? Because also, like, if you even think about it from the dawah perspective, I think just thinking from the revert lens, the best dawah I've ever received was actually just the kindness, generosity, and the principled nature of Muslims. And this is not asking you to compromise things. This is just saying that we live in a very diverse, multicultural world. And actually, there's beauty in recognizing different cultures, different values, and different communities' values as well. So there's that. I think that's where I'd start, because I think even in the 2024 election, I think one of the big reflections that I had was that I don't think we did enough of that, and we just sort of marketed it as like this big Muslim push, when actually, like, this is just we're all like creations of Allah, right? Everyone has their soul, and so really, like, restoring that kind of fundamental understanding that within us all is like a divine fitra. We know what's right between good and evil. I think is very important to center when we talk about building coalitions.
Yeah,
Love that. Thank you.
I sort of agree with some of that. I mean, I would just say one thing, just a caveat there, that yes, for sure, we shouldn't come across as like a Muslim only project. But at the same time, we should never undermine the real power, if, for want of a better word, that we actually do have. The problem we've got in our communities is that we've just given our vote over to Labour without any question.
Yeah, definitely.
And so we've ended up in a situation where you could have a place like Bradford West that has almost 50% Muslims, and yet those Muslims are just like rubber stamping the most ludicrous candidate. In Blackburn, they voted in Foreign Secretary Jack Straw, Labour Foreign Secretary, for absolutely ages, because it was just a given that Muslims are going to vote for Labour. So I think there's a lot to be said about how it's important that any project that builds alliances first starts with unifying. So this is my first thing, unifying the Muslim vote. Of course, we shouldn't stop there, but neither should we sort of deny the Muslim vote. Like, I remember after the last 2024 general election, which was very successful in many ways, we broke a record in Britain by electing 4 independents, 5 if you include Jeremy Corbyn. That's never happened at general election for ages, for a long time. I don't think it's happened since before the First World War. So we managed to do that, and then there were still people who were saying, "Oh, we've made a mistake there because we focused too much on Muslim. Why don't we call it the moral vote or something?" But that completely defuses our potential as a community and actually just creates this sort of mass that goes anywhere. We can't have that. We need to have unity when it comes to our voting intentions. And that requires corralling the Muslim community and bringing them together with you on a singular platform as much as possible, I would suggest, right? I think the second problem...
Yeah, I agree. No, and one thing I want to...
No, I don't mean... No, it wasn't a criticism at all. Sorry, Sean. I was just more...
No, of course not. But yeah. One thing I wanted to actually get your thoughts on, though, is like, how do you make sure, though, that doesn't turn into like a very tribal thing as well? So what internal safeguards can you have to make sure that... Because in with the pain that you feel with Labour, which is something we all felt, is that it's quite easy to kind of just flip and go like all the way to the other side and just say, oh, we just need to just build politics with Muslims now. It just needs to be a Muslim-only thing. So how do we make sure that we still have that balance, though, that it just doesn't like, turn into a degenerate form of it? You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, it's a good point. I think it's a very simple thing in a way, because when we recognize our collective power, we then build. It's like what Shaukat did in Leicester. He developed really good relations with the Sikh community, right? Yeah. And he reached out to them, and he managed to bring a broad coalition. It's like what Liane Mohammed did in Ilford, where she reached out to non-Muslims, and so you need to be able to, I think, reach out to a broad array of people, but like, don't devalue. I'm not saying you were saying that. I'm saying like people have said that. Don't devalue like the power of your initial unity that exists as a community. I think the second problem we face as a community, and it's a real problem, and actually I see it still at the council elections, is that we've got the wrong people standing usually or sometimes for these electoral seats. And you see that at council level, um, where we are unified, you sometimes do have candidates that are subpar. Now, that doesn't mean, by the way, that we should make, the what's the phrase? We should make the improper, the whatever the I can't even think of the phrase now, so I'm messing that up. But we shouldn't uh, 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 seek perfection, and that's it, right? But at the same time, we want candidates that stand for these elections that have a genuine ethic that they want to serve the community. Like I was amazed by there was a Maulana, an Islamic figure who's standing to be a counselor in Blackburn, and I spoke to someone locally, and I initially said, "Oh, what does this Maulana know about councils?" Like I was sort of questioning it, and his response was, "You don't know. This guy has a strong background in public service. He's reached out. He deals with non-Muslims all the time. He does soup kitchens. He does this and that and the other." And so this is an extension of his work, right? This is what he and these are the sorts of candidates we need, people who genuinely care about
Mm.
humanity and care about people, rather than people who just want to, you know, they want to go back to Pakistan and say to their friends that I'm a counselor. And so, they get all the kudos that's surrounding the fact that you're a counselor of Enfield or something. Um, sorry for that. And
Nah,
the
they'll never
last,
have a Pakistani in Enfield anyways. They're only
they would never have
Turkish people,
Pakistani.
so
Then. Oh,
yeah.
fair enough. Also go back to Ankara and say that. Um, yeah, and I think one other thing is that we're badly in need of political literacy. Like we just don't understand the political system. Muslim community is really acting in the dark here. And I think it would be a great idea just to have a road show where we go around the country explaining, in one or two sit-ins, explaining what the political system is about and how you can really take advantage in inverted commas, or at least, act in a way in which you can utilize that political system for the
Mm,
good of you and your community and the wider community.
I
I
agree.
love that idea. Sorry, Brother Sean, were you going to say something?
No, no, I was just saying I agree. I agree.
Yeah, no, I love that idea of the a roadshow. What is the political system about? So just to recap, because mashallah, you've shared, both of you have shared great points. So what I've heard is generally there's a resistance to building coalition, building bridges, that we have the wrong people standing. I'm not sure. Is that something that's out of our hands, brothers? Is that something that we can impact? The wrong people standing versus having the right people standing, to have political literacy and also to reach out to the broader group of people, other groups of people that stand, and believe in the same things that we do in terms of humanity in general. That's kind of what I got from both of you. Am I correct?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. So, okay, this takes us to my next question. How do parties like Reform react when they see a high turnout in diverse areas? Does it move the needle?
How do
Yeah.
they react? I mean, if I may say, I mean, they hate it.
Yeah.
They hated it when Muslims come out and vote because, of course, the more we come out and vote, the more they're going to they see it as they call it a sectarian vote. Even if we try our best to reach to all sides of the community and build alliances, they will call it a sectarian vote. And so that's just the way they are, right? When they reach out to the white working class and exaggerate the issues of immigration and crime and all these things, that's like just being sensible politicians. But when Muslims stand and for local councils and say, we just don't like the fact that there is criminality in our area, that the bin collections are terrible, or the local council really doesn't use its money correctly. Well, that's sectarianism. So of course they're going to label us, but who cares? Like, is my sort of simple answer to that. I think the good thing about the Muslim community today is we're beyond caring about what these fringe voices think about us. Some Muslims now see it as a badge of honor. If Nigel Farage decides to go after you, then that tells you that you're doing something right because he hates it when, ethnic minority communities decide that they're going to exercise their civic responsibilities.
Yeah, I would only add as well, like these part, like I think most political parties, to be honest, they don't really care about the truth, but they just care about a certain narrative which helps further their own political ends. And that is just the nature of politics, by the way. It's not even like a moral critique. It really is just how politics works. And so when it comes to reform, their whole legitimacy is derived from this larger meta narrative because fundamentally, politics as well, or just understanding the world is all about storytelling, right? Even like the Quran is literally just full of like a bunch of stories. You know what I mean? So the way we understand the world is a story, and their big narrative that they push and sell is this idea of like returning back to a greater Britain, and that project of Greater Britain is something which exists without the very like degenerate quote unquote Muslims, i.e., us lot. So for them, like seeing whatever happens, yeah, if a Muslim gives to a homeless person, if a Muslim does something great, if Muslims pray in a certain area, if they turn out, they're gonna just find a way to use that to facilitate the narrative that gives them legitimacy. And so I guess that's kind of echoes Mohammed's point around that. It is just a bit of nonsense caring about what they have to say because they don't do it with good intentions or with sincere intentions at all. Um, and yeah, it is just that's the type of behavior that you should expect from people from like the Reform Party.
Can I make a point? Sister Hina raises a question about the Green Party,
Please do,
and
brother.
I want to sort of respond to that because my feeling is that what we shouldn't do as a community is put all of our lot behind a political party. And that is the danger of what we may be doing today, like we did with your party, and look how that failed, and like we did with the Workers' Party, and look how that failed, and like we did with Labour, and look how that failed, right? We should, as a community, be far more selective in who we give our vote to, and not just sort of run after the next fad. Right? So the Green Party may be great on Palestine, but recently they've suspended or thrown out members of their political party who were very strongly against Zionism, and they have. And so that tells you something about their limits as a political party. I'm not trying to say to you that the Green Party are bad, and in some contexts we should be voting for them, and certainly we should have a conversation with them. But even on the issue of Palestine, they do have limits, and they're not ready to stand their ground. Like, for example, the American Green Party is. I mean, the American Green Party is far more willing to call a spade, and to be, and to within the context of the law, to argue that resistance is enshrined in international law. Whereas if you say that at the moment, as a Green Party representative in the UK, you're likely to be thrown out of the political party, and that's happened in the last few weeks with some of their members. So I would just say be careful about having this sort of rose tinted view about any political party. They all have their limits, and they've all got and we've got red lines as a community, and we deal with them. Here's the key thing: our relationship with them is not about partisanship. Our relationship has got to be transactional. We want something from them, and if we're going to give them our vote, they need to give that to us as a community, right? Or as a bloc, as an alliance. We're not just going to say to them, like I was in a meeting recently with someone quite senior in the Green Party, and there was a Muslim there. He said, like, from the get-go, oh, great, I'm going to tell all my friends to vote for you. And I said to him later, well, wait a minute, what did you ask from that person in return for your vote? You didn't ask for anything. That's just you're dealing with the Green Party as if they're another Labour Party. And that's not how politics works. Everyone works on the basis of transaction. And so why are we not transactional when it comes to our politics?
SubhanAllah, that's enlightening. I would never have thought of that. Never would have thought that. So Brothers, I could ask you so many questions, subhanAllah, because I for one, I'm learning a lot. So thank you. My next question is, how do parties like Reform react? Oh, we've done that one. Okay. What actually changes in a council building the morning after a massive turnout from the Muslim community? And I think I need to preface this question with another one. So actually, no, let's stick to that. What actually changes in a council building the morning after a massive turnout from the Muslim community?
Yeah, well, I'll preface this by saying I've never been in a council building before. But I will basically take it from the level of like political strategy, and basically councils are all the council leaders and councillors have their own political party teams. And actually, like the first things that they do after, of course, like celebrating their win or whatever, is to really understand like the ward level data, um, because each party will pretty much have people doing post-election analysis within around like 2 days. And if the ward might swing, for example, unusually due to like a high turnout from a particular demographic, then that will go into the briefing for the council leader or for the particular representative. So ultimately, like these things do influence political thinking and political strategy. And so if there was, for example, a ward where a councillor might have ignored for a long time because they knew they just weren't that politically engaged, but then all of a sudden they really were, then that might be the direction of their activity or their behaviour in their upcoming tenure. So from a very kind of political strategy behaviour point, that's probably what happens. And it's important to note that, again, the council team, the local, like the mayor, so whoever runs the council, they all are the portfolio holders for like housing, planning, licensing, community cohesion initiatives, etc. And so it's important to know that they do stuff with the money that comes in, and based off their win, that's basically going to play into their decision making.
Mm. Okay, so on the flip side then, is voting for us just the bare minimum? What should we do or what must happen on May the 8th, the day after the election?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that look, voting is just one of those means that are available to us. I wouldn't say it's an obligation. I wouldn't say it's the most important thing we should be doing as a community. I would just say it's one of those things. The way we've got to view voting is that it's one of many things we have at our disposal to be able to make an impact, to be able to enjoy what is good, to be able to benefit ourselves and our communities and humanity at large, right? But there are all sorts of things we should be doing, from mosques and soup kitchens and community action groups and whatever it may be. These are all our responsibilities as a community. So I would say let's not oversell the value of voting, but let's not undervalue it either, such that we don't turn up and we don't vote, right? It's just one of those things that we should get into the habit of doing as a community, as long as we're doing it together in unison and we're building broad alliances and we're making sure that the right people are standing. Like there's an example of a particular ward. I'm going to name this place because it's probably worth saying it, in Redbridge, where it's terrible. You've got basically 3 seats and you've got 6 independent candidates that are contesting those three ward seats. So they're cancelling each other out. They're basically going to hand the election to Labour because they couldn't get together before that and decide, okay, let's divide this all up, between us, right? And so what they've ended up doing is their egos have taken over and they've ended up standing against one another. We can't have that. We just can't have that. And so I think that one of the things I want after this election is that I think we should have far more responsible people who are willing to, politics is about compromise, who are willing to strike compromises with one another for the greater good. At the moment, for our community, I'm afraid so much politics is about egos. It's about leadership. It's about kudos that comes with that responsibility, and that's getting in the way of actually functioning as a real politician that's rooted in our ethics.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add.
I do have a question following on from that, Brother Jalal. This is specifically to Brother Sean. So we have the approach of compromising for the greater good, specifically Enfield. What does that look like?
Specifically Enfield. That's a
Yeah.
good question. Um, I'm not even sure yet. I know so that for example in Enfield, we have the Enfield Independence, which is actually quite cool. And his name is Khalid, and Khalid has lived here for a long time. And he's done a lot of organizing in the local area. So to be honest, I need to just WhatsApp him and see what's going on. Because even in my local ward, I'm not sure if like they extend that far. But to be honest, beyond voting as well, just generally speaking, um, it's just I think to be honest, it's just about like what like talents you have. So I've fallen into just quote unquote having the talent that I'm okay at communicating, and I have a background in PPE at Oxford. So then literally my main hobby, the thing I do in my spare time, is just chat about politics all the time. You know what I mean? So whether that's like a local school might come and invite me to do a workshop or something like that, is what I'll do. So I think alongside just obviously picking who to vote for via principle, but also the kind of pragmatic element of who's going to be best in the local area between the Greens or like the local independents. Beyond that, um, politics is not just what happens in Westminster. It's not just about voting. It's about, decision making and changing your local area. So I think we can all look a bit inwards to understand like what can we do politically, where even if it's like volunteering with a charity or something like that.
I love that. Thank you. You mentioned workshops for the young. So I do have a question regarding our young. In a climate of fear, how can young Muslims move from feeling like victims of politics to being architects of change?
Mm.
Go for
Well,
it, Sean. You fit that demographic.
um, yeah, I mean, I think it's just I mean just look in the wisdom of our own tradition, right? Like actually, these things aren't like binary categories. They're kind of one and the same, you know? You have to experience oppression, you have to experience hardship, because on the flip side of that, it's like two sides of the same coin, right? Then on the other side of that is like, success, power, and all these sorts of things. So actually, like us being quote unquote victims um, isn't a static state of affairs. Rather, like, you're going to move between victimhood and whatever the opposite of victimhood is. I don't really have the word for that, all the time. Like, even if you look into the kind of seer of the prophet, right? Like, it's very easy to look at, like, just the Mecca revelations and think that, oh, well, I guess, like, yeah, Muslims were victims to the powers that be. But actually, over time, what happened is that you're building yeah, I mean, in very many ways, I think it is a very quote unquote political story of you're building power together, you're building a community together, and you're actually, using your own talents and your own skills to take on the status quo. So I think a lot of young Muslims can do that in whatever respective fields they can imagine. There's a lot of power in descriptive representation as well. So the fact that a lot of young Muslims are empowered by seeing a Muslim footballer or a Muslim athlete and things like that. So I think, yeah, it's about looking beyond just the political to escape victimhood, because actually there's a lot of role models who aren't political, but also just understanding that the story of politics, this is just a natural progression of life, history, and the human experience. Um, and there's a kind of comforting uh, element to that, to know that people have gone through much worse than us.
Hmm. Awesome. Thank you, Brother Jalal. Did you have anything to add to that? I've reached my last question, and we do have some questions in the chat. No? Okay. So my final question it is, what what would it take to make the Muslim vote truly impossible for the political establishment to ignore?
I think, I really believe in the Muslim vote, and I think that what it would take is if in the next election, so that's probably 2029 or 2028, 2029, in the next election, general election, if the Muslim vote is able to elect candidates in the 28 odd seats where if we came together as a community, we could elect any candidate of our choice. That's really what the demographic data tells us, right? If we truly believed in ourselves as a community, we would be able to do that across the country. And in the next election, it's most likely to be a hung parliament or a minority government. And that simply means that no one party is going to dominate. So imagine if you have a block of 25 candidates. Now, by the way, there may be non-Muslims. I'm not saying they have to be Muslims, but I'm just saying it comes through principally as a base, the Muslim vote. If we were able to achieve that, then that would be a very big, important force. Bear in mind that the Green Party currently only have 4 MPs or 5 MPs now in Parliament, right? So it will be a very formidable force, in the next election, and then we can start doing the good that we want to do for the wider society. But I think at the moment, because we're not thinking strategically sometimes, and we're not putting forward the right candidates, we're unfortunately we're soliciting own goals all the time when it comes to elections, and that's not a problem. By the way, I'm an optimist usually, and I feel that at least we're getting somewhere, as elections proceed. So I'm not trying to say that it's all doom and gloom, but I would say that it requires good people to step up, to start thinking more deeply about how we conduct ourselves in these elections. We can't have like a repeat of what's happening in Redbridge, where you've got 6 independent Muslim candidates, by the way, fighting for 3 seats. I mean, that's a shame on everyone in Redbridge that is participating in that sham, really.
But do you know why I'm hopeful though? Because I think that's just like really heavy on like uncle politics. But like
Yeah.
actually, my generation, like even Leanne, like we were friends since we were 15, and we're literally part of the same generation.
Mm.
Like it will be different, I think. So I'm optimistic that hopefully like we
Yeah.
can outgrow like all of that kind of back home kind of mentality type stuff, you know?
Yeah, it's sort of like the mosque committee there's the mosque committee politics being superimposed on local politics and general politics, and that has to stop, really.
Yeah, I agree.
Um, yeah.
I love that uncle politics.
It's
Um,
killing us, man. It's killing us.
it is. Okay, so I am looking at the chat and I love what Sister Hina has asked. And this ties in with what you've just shared with Jalal. How can a person become involved in politics? Excellent question. MashaAllah.
Yeah, I mean, so there's no real qualification you need, of course, to be involved in politics. Like, you don't need to have a degree in politics or anything like that. Really, what you've got to do is join a local grouping that is concerned about politics, right? So usually you will find such groupings. They may belong to a political party, but of course, for all of the reasons that I've stated, that may not be the best route. But now, probably in so many communities where there are Muslim populations, you do have committees of Muslims who are now thinking about like independent engagement in politics. So I think it's about joining that. You should, the starting point has got to be like civic responsibility. So it's got to be like you've got to get into politics because you want to serve people, you want to do things, you want to be able to make life better for people, and that's got to be your starting point. So, like my view is that, for example, there are so many opportunities for us to serve the communities in which we live without having to initially join the political bandwagon. But we should do that as maybe that could be an extension to the mosque, where we're giving back by opening up soup kitchens and by having sort of consultations with people who are migrants who aren't able to fill in forms, or pensioners, and helping all of these things, these are all very political actions, by the way. They're not separate from politics. You've got to get in this sort of civic mindset, and that's how politics starts from the grassroots. It starts from, and the best politicians are the ones who actually engage with real people rather than, from above. They feel that they know they've got solutions to their problems.
Yeah, I would say yeah, the civic duty point is very important. I think there are formal means of getting involved in politics, which is like, joining parties and that type of stuff. But to be honest, like I'm not a member of a political party, and the thing I want to stress from what Mohammed was saying today, is that the don't basically just give blind support to a political party. You always vote with principle, always vote with intention first and foremost, because the tribal kind of clan identity stuff is really what's kind of killing politics as it is now. But something that we always say on our podcast on North Star, cheeky plug, is that politics is not just Westminster. And we actually have a very, very broad definition of what it means to be political. But actually, politics is everywhere. And so I think in many ways, like being a good person is an act of quote unquote political resistance, because the powers that be and the structures all around us, whether it's the kind of very capitalist world that we live in or however you want to define it, um, incentivizes you to not be a good person, right? It's turning you very inwards, making us very selfish. It's making us think it's more rational or more logical for us to, just care about our own selves and things like that. So in the face of that, I really think like struggle, like, jihad, like that kind of personal inner struggle is to be a good person, which is to, of course, like, I mean, our tradition says it all, like pay your zakat, etc. But go out into the community, volunteer in your spare time. Not everyone's going to be like a political commentator. Not everyone's going to be a politician. Okay, that's not everyone's destiny. But actually, like being fundamentally a good person and doing what you can to improve the condition of vulnerable people is so important. I just released like a recent like mini documentary, and I went to Bow Food Bank for the day. A lot of people in Bow Food Bank who are volunteers at the food bank are also people who need the food bank themselves. So also, I guess, kind of like, I don't know if the right word is like decolonize the word politics, but I think like I hate how politics as a phrase has become just like Westminster straitjacket, but really, it's a lot more than that.
I appreciate that so much. And you talk about a cheeky plug. I think I have one right now, Sister Hina, specifically for you. I have a quick question and feel free to share in the chat. Are you a Rosebud Sisters member? Because that's one surefire way of being very minded, as Brother Jalal has mentioned. It's an organization where we can and we do serve the people to better our community, to better the Ummah as a whole. And this is what we're here to do, to serve our communities. If you are a Rosebuds member, great. Reach out to the Rosebuds admin. If not, then still please do reach out to the Rosebuds admin. And that's for any sisters here that are listening. If you are politically minded or not, maybe you're not, and you just want to better the community, feel free to reach out to Rosebuds sisters, inshallah. Okay, so our next question comes from Faye, who joined a bit late. You mentioned engaging with political parties as a transactional relationship where support is given in exchange for meaningful commitments seems pragmatic. From a Muslim perspective, what principles or demands should be considered non-negotiable and consistently placed at the forefront of any such engagement?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think it comes down to the priorities locally as a community, but as well as our priorities globally. So, for example, for the last few years, Palestine has been quite rightly a non-negotiable. We want our political representatives to realize that we're not going to vote for them if they're going to brazenly um, um, establish, the means to commit this genocide. Because they think we're going to come back to them regardless, right? So I think we've got to have a hierarchy for sure of demands. But I mean, Palestine certainly sits there, sits high up on our list. But of course, we're going to have local demands as well. There will be economic and financial claims that we have over our local representatives, about the use of money. And I think it's up to communities to come together to hammer out what these demands should be before engaging with these political parties. Now, that's at a local level. Of course, at a national level, it's different because at a national level, the community leaderships, and there isn't really a singular leadership, will have some demands. For example, one demand to the Green Party has always been that, in those seats where we've already got established independents, or in those seats where it's easier for the Muslim community to elect an independent than a green candidate for all sorts of reasons, partly because so many Muslims, especially the more north you go, are very distrustful of their progressive liberalism. Um, so, if it's easier to elect an independent candidate, they should stand aside in those seats so that we can elect an independent who's going to, in effect, work with them in Parliament for the greater good, right? So that's a demand. And I think that's a demand that at the moment the Green Party is not accepting because they're just, I'll be honest with you, the Green Party are just, sadly, they've taken one or two by-election wins to their heads, and they think now that they can command the Muslim community's support. And that's simply because we haven't approached them in a transactional way. We should be saying to them, look, we will support you in Bristol. We're going to support you in Waltham Forest. We're going to support you in places where you have a greater chance of winning those seats, and we still have good numbers. But in return, you've got to support us because we're not Green Party aficionados. We're simply people who want to do the best for humanity and for communities, right? Um, so I think that, like, I haven't given you a thorough answer, Faye, and I do apologize, but I think that it's a mixture of demands. But my point is, don't go empty-handed. Like, don't just say, oh, the Green Party has said something positive about Palestine, so we're going to give all of our votes to the Green Party, regardless of what they do and say now and sometime in the future. It's like a sort of, we want prenuptials with these political parties, right? We don't just want these political parties to have like what's the Christian in death and in, I can't even think of it, in health and in death, whatever the phrase is. Sorry, I know someone's going to correct me.
Yeah, I get it.
In what was
Um,
that, Sean?
no, I get it. I know what you're trying to say, but I can't even
Yeah,
remember myself.
in sickness and in health.
Yeah.
We're going
The
to support
vows.
the political party in sickness and in health. Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think it's actually a really good question. I actually don't have the answer, but I do know that through human experience in the last 2 years, we've all kind of realized that, I mean, Gaza is like the huge litmus test, and that's because I think if you work backwards from what can be reasonably debated and what can't be, something like Gaza can't be reasonably debated. Like if you are debating the humanity of Palestinians, then fundamentally, like, your heart is turned to stone. You know what I mean? Like if we take it to the Quranic verses, like this is just people who have like shot off any divine light from them at all. So I think like that's why it's become such a litmus test because bear in mind, even people who are very right wing can call out, and people who hate Muslims can call out, by the way, this is like a horrible sight we're seeing. So I think Gaza has turned into a big litmus test over, what can be a non-negotiable. So that's the easy one. But I do think when it comes to local elections, it becomes a bit more difficult because not everything is that clear cut. So if there is a way to, join local community groups or even start one with your friends, like if other people live in the area, and then you can literally just approach a councillor to say, look, like these are the things we care about, this is what we want, then you can have that kind of like transactional relationship. Um, but it really is a case by case basis, because I think the Gaza, uh, like if you even call it a debate or anything like that, it's it goes beyond politics. It's something a bit more sinister.
We have one more question. So, Brother Jalal, feel free to leave at your uh, whenever you feel whenever you wish to. The last question is, and I am mindful of Maghrib, how do you find those responsible people? Everyone has different understanding of being responsible, and unfortunately, people do come with their own agenda. So how do you work to unify them? This is in relation to the Redbridge incident. Okay.
Yeah, so the question is, how do you find responsible people? I think that we know that there are really good responsible people in the Muslim community and beyond, right? Sometimes the most reluctant people who don't want to, who feel that they don't want to take political office because they don't want to be tarnished by the sort of the corruption that comes with politics. We've got to encourage these sorts of people. I mean, I think Sean was making a point about how, the younger communities, younger Muslims in our communities, which by the way are the majority now. The majority of the Muslim community are under the age of 30. Um, the Muslim community is a young community, and if we're going to sort of like separate ourselves from this uncle politics that we talk of this sort of mosque politics, we've got to encourage these people to get more involved. So I think we have more than capable candidates. Like I'll give you a quick anecdote. I went to. I'm not going to give you where I went, but I went to a place where they were lamenting that they couldn't find a single candidate to put forward for election. So they put forward a guy who wasn't really that ready, right? So I sat in a room with around 20 people who were all telling me like we just couldn't find someone. So I asked them, okay, tell me about yourselves. One guy was a barrister. One guy was a magistrate. One guy was two or three guys were medical doctors. Some guys. I'm not saying these are the only people that should stand for, but they obviously had a sense of civic responsibility. They were people who were, who cared about their community. Yet they were lamenting that they didn't have a single candidate in their community to put forward for the general election, right? And that's a travesty of it, that so many of our good talent are not standing for election. And instead, we're getting people who are opportunists, who want to make a name for themselves. And as I said, they want to go to jail and get, get a warm welcome because they've been able to become a councillor of, I would say, Waltham Forest this time. And that's, I think that's the travesty of it. So we have such great people in our communities, and we've just got to encourage them to be more ready to take on those responsibilities.
Yeah, and just to even add to that, I mean, I come across so many young people. Well, I'm a young person myself, but I'm inspired all the time by a lot of like the young people that I meet, particularly Muslims as well. So I'm actually very optimistic for the generations to come because I think there's a lot of talent there. So I think really the question then is, so with people who have like capital, with people who have connections, etc., how can you open up pathways and avenues to basically help nourish that talent and allow young, talented Muslims to flourish if they choose to go down this route? Um, I think on top of that as well, it's also important that our own community, you know, have a lot of grace and mercy for candidates, and that's young or old, because I think it's a very difficult space to be a political representative and also authentically Muslim. And when people make compromises, it's very easy to critique them. But actually, if we just put ourselves in their shoes, we need to understand that is a very difficult thing to do. So actually, I think that actually also puts people off, and a lot of young people off, for going into politics, because even if I have conversations with young people, they just say, "Oh, God forbid, I don't want to get like the haram police on me," you know what I mean, and that type of stuff. So I think we need to have that culture within us to always be very supportive and assume the best of the Muslim and brothers and sisters who might end up being our kind of political representatives.
Well said. Well said. Brother Sean, I did say that the previous question was going to be our last one. We'll take this last one from Brother Abdullah and then we will wrap it up for the night. Inshallah, how can we guarantee candidates will support Muslims after coming into office? Is there any way we can design escalation strategies where candidates who become politicians take our demands seriously?
Yeah, I think that's why voting is so important, because again, although it is one of the many means to to like politics and being active in politics, ultimately the currency that candidates talk is, and like the money that they care about is basically votes, right? They if you assume at a fundamental level that all these candidates want to get re-elected, it's very important that we tell them like just point blank, we won't re-elect you in the next election. And what that looks like in practice is always like, being very active, turning up to candidate surgeries, being vocal online, and also as a community having a sense of unity as well. So there's not necessarily like escalation strategies per se that could happen. I guess like one way you could think about it is if you joined a political party and there was a certain majority of people who all kind of had the same shared values as Muslims, you can always trigger by-elections. If the local party want to kind of vote out the local representative, like that is possible, but that's, I guess, a bit more of a niche way. Um, but fundamentally, the underlying principle to all of this is staying politically engaged and always keeping up to date on what that candidate is doing. So demanding transparency is very important because you don't know how to critique them or tell them that they've fallen short or even praise them if you don't know what they're doing. So they need to always have some sort of like clear communication channels with you, and that you is the wider Muslim community. Um, so yeah, that's probably the starting point, I would say, for that.
Inshallah, Jazakallah khair. I think we can conclude it now. I am mindful of everyone's time, and Maghrib is approaching if it hasn't already. Brother Jalal has left us, so unfortunately I'm unable to thank him. But Brother Sean, thank you so, so much. I appreciate you being here tonight. You've taken time out of your busy schedule. You rushed back from work, mashallah, to be here with us tonight. And I really hope that we are able to reconnect with you in future events such as this. I do believe that working with the youth, amongst aside from the older generation, but the youth specifically is a great thing that you're doing. They are our next generation, and we do need some good people standing in politics. So, inshallah, I hope to reconnect with you in the not too distant future. Once again, thank you so much. Thank you to all our listeners as well. We appreciate your questions and you being here tonight. And on that note, have a great evening, Brother Sean. Thank you very much, and we will speak soon, inshallah.